You gonna mess around and be just like Diamond's ass. 4 years gonna be done passed you by, and you gonna be riding around in a Honda Accord.
Oh my God, bro.
Oh, hell.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Breakdown, where we talk about everything cars, news, and reviews. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. So I want to go over a very interesting topic, as always, because I always have interesting topics. I want to go over Honda's alleged identity crisis. Now, for many of you who know anything about Honda, you know that Honda has been a well-known and reputable brand in many households for many generations. But it seems as though, as of late, they don't know who they want to be. And I want to go over a few things that I think may be the issues and how they could possibly curtail it, or how we as consumers can possibly curtail how we perceive the brand. So stick around and stay tuned, because you are now watching The Breakdown. As always, if you're new to the channel, please feel free to like and subscribe, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know now that this may be a lengthier video than normal. I will go ahead and put the chapter descriptions and allocations below so that you can go look at it for yourself. But I will not be skipping anything that I deem important, because I think that Honda does a really good job of what they do, but there is a lost moment that we have to dig in and we have to find. So with that being said, let's get on to it. Before the gas crisis of 1973, many of the big three were seen as the top dogs in the automotive market, and honestly, Honda, Toyota, and Nissan were just seen as lesser than, and nobody really wanted them, which is about right for Americans, because we like big, bold, and no, we don't like small shit, no pun intended, and get your minds out the gutter. Anyway, most people, it was not unseen for you to see a pastor named Mr. Biggs who was driving a Cadillac and not a Honda. It was not uncommon. But as time went on, fast forward into a couple of years down the road, and we enter into the energy crisis of 1973, and more cars that were seen as fuel gas guzzling cars, basically more people began to trade in their cars for more fuel efficient cars, and this begins the precipice, the origin story, and the villain story of American Honda. Now, American Honda was founded in 1959, and fast forward into the 1970s, they did have three core models. There initially was the N600, which was the very first model to debut in the American market. You also had the Z600, which didn't really sell that well, and then you had later on the Civic, which is the most notable car, and then you also had the Accord CVCC. Now, for a lot of people, they ended up going into the Civic CVCC as well as the Accord, because they love the spaciousness, the ergonomics, as well as the efficiency and driving dynamics of these itty-bitty cars, because front-wheel drive cars at this point were something that was low-key unheard of and seen as basically cheap. Now, I want to go ahead and tell you guys, when the 1973 gas crisis hit and them gas prices was beating our ass, baby, we slid on to them Japanese manufacturers like it was a blue light special on Kmart. And it was not unseen for every other car to slowly become away from the Chryslers, the Chevys, and the Fords to Hondas and Toyotas and Mazdas and Nissans. It was something that you had to be there for. And the revolution and the renaissance of the Japanese automaker was here, and it was here with a vengeance. I also want to go on and say that a lot of these Japanese cars, when people finally caught on to what they were, they realized that many of these cars were super low maintenance. Now, I will go ahead and say that the N600 was considered to be a little more problematic than the Civic as well as the Accord, but for the most part, once Honda went back and fixed the N600 and the problems with those engines, Honda was seen as a reliable ass car. You couldn't get a car that was more reliable than that, or a Toyota. And the way that people raved about them, you would have thought it was the next coming of age. I mean, it was just something that Americans had never seen before. It used to be that cars would only last 100,000 miles and they would be problematic, but the Japanese competitors made these cars simple, efficient, and effective, and there was nothing unlike it. And in case you guys didn't know, I still go up for Japanese cars the same way I do for German cars and American cars. I go up for all of them, but anyway. And speaking of Civics, today's feature shirt is this Civic shirt, which is The World Is Coming, which was their first advertisement. If you like this shirt, I'm gonna go ahead and leave a link in the description below because I know you guys want to check it out. And with that being said, let's get back into the show. To put things into perspective, nobody would have ever thought that the Japanese automakers would come in and drop kick everybody's ass in dealer showrooms. It was something that everybody pretty much oversighted. So let me go ahead and set the scene, right? So it's 1982. The Gap Band just dropped a bomb on us with their new single. Your auntie had a bomb ass Jerry curl and she just got her brand new Honda Accord. And the 1982 was the first year for the CRX as well as the second generation for the Prelude. And when I tell you this is the renaissance of Honda, nobody could think that Honda could get any better from its days of the 70s and people thought it was a fad. But let me tell you, Honda came back with the double down and the clap back and they said, you know what time it is, go and buy one of our Hondas. And that's exactly what they did. And when the new Honda Prelude came out, the CRX came out, people thought it was stupid. One of the big things that was in at the time was the pop-up headlights, and everybody had to have the pop-up headlights. You couldn't go nowhere without the pop-pop, okay? The pop-pop was it, okay? Like if you was coming in and you had the bomb-ass Accord joints, as they say in New York, the Accord joints, the pop-up headlights was a must. Now, amidst Honda being the innovators that they are, they also was clapping our cheeks with technology, and they were actually one of the first cars to pioneer the in-car navigation satellite system, and that could be actually put into a Honda Accord. Like, who was thinking of this back in 1981? And if you didn't know, for most manufacturers, they tend to take a long time, and one of the biggest innovators next to Honda is Mercedes. Mercedes has patented a lot of technology that a lot of people use today in their cars, but that's a whole nother tangent. Now, I don't know why Honda would call it this, because it sounds like a toy that is used to pleasure one's self-satisfaction, but they called it the electro car
gyrocator.
What the f is
a gyrocator?
It sounds like gyrating.
You better wake up, you nasty!
Now, the reason why I was called a
gyrocator,
that sounds so nasty. The reason why I was called a
gyrocator
was because it used a gyroscope and a servo gear to pinpoint the location and how far it moved from the location. It was something really interesting, but definitely gave kit technology in Knight Rider back in 1982 and was on a Honda of all cars.
There's no reason for increased volume. I am scanning your interrogatives quite satisfactorily.
You thought Honda was done? No. Honda was not done with the all right? So back in 1986, actually 1985, we would not even dare to dream back in the early 80s. The only thing that could be considered luxury, especially with the Germans, BMW, Mercedes, and Audi. Audi got into some trouble in the 80s, but we'll get into that in a second. But there was nobody that was doing luxury like them until y'all roll the clips. There's nobody here, it's just me.
The automotive world knew it would come. It was only a matter of time. Acura, a new dimension in performance automobiles from a new division of American Honda. The Acura Legend V6 luxury touring sedan and Acura Integra 16-valve sports sedan. Precision-crafted automobiles available now exclusively at Acura dealers. It was only a matter of time.
It's me. When the Acuras dropped, you had the Legend and you had the Teggy-Poo, or the Integra, some people like to call it. The Teggy-Poo, as I like to call it, was something that every enthusiast could get without worrying about how they were going to afford the rent the next month. And of course, there were other manufacturers such as Subaru and Datsun that were giving you somewhat similar performance, especially Mazda. I never forget about them. But the Teggy-Poo, Acura was the first Japanese luxury manufacturer to hit the States, and it was crazy. You don't get Lexus without Acura because they were the first to do it, because they wanted to test the markets and see what people can do. And this had been in development since the 80s, which is absolutely wild that the Honda manufacturers and engineers were pushing the envelope to say, we want to be better than them motherfuckers at Chrysler. And I like Chrysler, but you know, we want to be better than them motherfuckers Mercedes and BMW. Out of here. The Acura's dropping was something unprecedented and nobody had seen. And even though Lexus came out later, Acura was the first to do it. And the Tegipu is the one that you got because it was not just an upscale Civic, but it was a performance-oriented Civic that had so many astounding things, including the pop-up headlights, 5-speed manual transmission, as well as the legendary B-Series 1.6-liter engine, which was a screamer. For the time. And when I tell you, you had to be there. Now, mind you, I'm not that old. Let me not bring my age into this. I'm not that old, but I can tell you that that is one of those times where you had to be there, because the way people talk about the Integra from then and the way it got better and better and better, unmatched. This, yeah, Honda had
Find your ass.
Honda had it, and there was nobody doing it like Honda, especially for a front-wheel drive based company, because Honda really didn't have any rear-wheel drive cars at the time. They specialized in front-wheel drive, front-engine cars, and it was nothing short of precise engineering, and that's why they call it precision crafted performance. And yes, just in case you're wondering, this is a Honda Stan account. No slander will be tolerated. Thank you so much. And I don't want to take away from the idea that there were also the normal staples such as the Accord and the Civic, but the Prelude, the CRX, and the Integra, the Legend, all of these vehicles were sedans, coupes, but they were so much fun. And of course you had cars like the Accord, the Civic, the Accord hatchback. I believe at one point there was a Civic 4-wheel drive, but that is nowhere near comparison to the performance gimmicks and specs and things that Honda used to offer us at an affordable price. And that's another thing I'm going to tie later into the video, but Hondas used to be genuinely affordable, and they were reliable and were very low maintenance and tons of fun and just almost the perfect package. There is a reason why Car and Driver has named the Accord top 10 best for almost 36 times, or not 37 times if I'm not mistaken, at the time of this recording. And more than likely the new Accord will also get that same halo, because at some point you just got to press play, and I'm still watching this on Netflix. And what's wild is that this wasn't even the end of it. So 1984 is a big pop culture year, and it's kind of wild how Honda thought, let's go ahead and throw something else in the mix. Let's shake the damn table.
Bring it down, because my head will start spinning. I'll chop on your trachea.
Try it. Try it. Try it. With me if you want to. It's not a good day. Okay? Now back to that one.
Shaking the table.
So in 1984, which is a big pop culture year, Honda decided we're gonna go big, we're gonna go hard, or we're gonna go home. Honda thought it was a good idea. They thought it was a good idea to create a competitor to Ferrari. The same people that make the Honda Civic, the fuel-efficient Honda Civic, thought it was a great idea to develop a supercar. And in 1989, at the 81st Chicago Auto Show, the NSX debuted, and it was unlike anything people had seen.
La squadra non funziona perché l'allenatore non va. Se non si caccia via l'allenatore, noi perderemo se lei ci l'allenatore. Gianni, che sorpresa!
Ciao papà, come stai?
Bene.
Senti, ti voglio far vedere una cosa.
Cos'è? Una Ferrari?
No, papà, Acura.
Acura?
Old world thinking has it that nothing can touch European engineering. But in Formula One racing, Honda has outpowered Ferrari to win the last 4 World Constructors' Championships. Welcome to the new world thinking. The NSX from Acura. Aluminum body, chassis, and midship engine. Handcrafted. The NSX from Acura. Because when we entered Formula One racing, we wanted more than just a trophy to show for it.
Now, when the NSX debuted, it was unlike anything the people had ever seen. It had an all aluminum body. It had a 3-liter V6, and this was naturally aspirated, by the way, and the engine went to 8,000 RPM. And if you've ever driven an S2000, which comes up later, you know that these Honda Screamers are something else. And it was the first everyday supercar, and it had a total of 270 horsepower, which is quite frankly very good for 1990. And there was something about it that it just made owning a supercar just as easy as owning an Accord, and that, my friends, is true engineering. For a point of reference, the Honda Accord down in the 7th generation would also come with a 3-liter V6, as well as the 6th generation Accord, but it's something to be said about this being in 1992 dropped from all the way in NSX into the Accord, basically Accord chassis. And that is something that I believe that Honda was really feeling themselves, because who the else thought it was a good idea to challenge Ferrari at something that you sell at the same price as a Corolla? Like, who does that? And what I mean by that is that the same people who made the Civic is the same people who made the NSX. Let that sink in. Now, I don't want y'all to be disillusioned. This Honda will never happen again. It's like having your favorite artist who left the era and you want them to go back. You want them to go back to making that same tired ass music, but they keep wanting to be in evolution and making new shit that you really don't want.
Singing that shoulda, coulda, wouldas.
And also, you have the introduction of the Civic Si, as well as the Acura Legend. You also had the Integra Type R that came out much later, which is hailed as the best handling front wheel drive car in the world. But it was only sold in limited quantity, so we didn't get many of it. But even still, Honda at that point knew who they were. They were affordable, efficient, fun driving performance. But something happened. Hold that thought.
Right now, you can get 21 extra bags of groceries into a Dodge Caravan, or 14 extra family pets, or almost enough extra equipment for a Pee Wee League football team. Because for the price of a regular Caravan, you can get a Grand Caravan. That's 25 extra cubic feet of space at no extra charge, for savings up to $21.50 during the Dodge Awards Celebration Sale.
Okay, so the year is 1993, and Dodge has been kicking ass with this Dodge Caravan. Now, for a lot of people that don't know anything about the Dodge Caravan, when it came out, it was basically one of the things that saved the Chrysler brand, and the K cars pretty much got deleted after the Caravan and the minivan was birthed. And the minivan took over what many people were looking for out of an SUV without the SUV feel. And the minivans were spacious, they were efficient, for the most part next to the Toyota Previa, or Previa, however the you say it, the Previa. The minivan was a staple in many households, especially in the earlier 90s. But the interesting thing is that Honda decided, hey, let's take on minivans, guys. Don't know why they did that, but they decided they wanted to take on minivans, and thus the Odyssey was born. The reason why this is so critical is because up until this point, Honda has not made any type of SUVs, to my knowledge. I could be wrong, but they don't make any SUVs before 1997, which is the first time that they make a vehicle, which is the CR-V. And the CR-V is simply a stretched Civic on a unibody platform and made a little more taller, so to speak, and essentially is a tall Civic. Why is that a problem? Because you also begin to see the Honda Insight. Fun fact, once again, Honda beat Toyota to the punch. I'm pretty sure they got some intel, somebody spilling their tea somewhere. But I'm pretty sure Toyota is like, I'm so sick of these Honda released the Honda Insight and beat Toyota to the punch before they released the Prius, and we all know how the Prius went. But you begin to see less and less performance cars and more fuel efficient, family focused cars. And this is the beginning. I also want to point out that the CR-V is Honda's first successful SUV and would go on to birth many more, such as the Pilot as well as the Element. And those are some of the models that kind of took over the Honda brand and changed changed it from being not quite a performance bargain brand, but an affordable family brand.
Pure white couches, limos, fashion.
Additionally, on the Acura side, you would see the Legend go from the Legend to the RL. You would see the Viger go to the 2.5 TL, and then later the 3.5 liter TL. And you would also begin to see many of the components that made Acura diminish into German clones, essentially. Even still, they couldn't be German clones because many of Honda's vehicles are front-wheel drive. And if you look at the design of the Legend, you also see that it's a longitudinal design, basically inspired by the Germans to give you the German straight six feel without the straight six rear-wheel drive platform. At one point or another, Acura begins to lose itself. That should have been a signifier of where Honda was going, because they begin to focus less and less on the luxury market, because they pretty much deemed it as we had conquered it and we can go do something else. And another car that a lot of people often forget about is the CL, which was the coupe. And the CL was basically an Accord doppelganger, and it did it not as great. It was just better to get a Accord coupe than it was to get a CL. Like, many people had the 2.3 liter, which was superiorly slow. The 3 liter that came in the CL was adequate, but it wasn't enough to justify the price point. And I also want to point out that Acura had a few other ventures. One of the big ones was when the Acura SLX came out back in '96, and it was essentially an Isuzu cousin, best friend, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't an Acura. And fast forward, that SLX would take over and become the Acura MDX, which is honestly Acura's best-selling SUV to date. Even with the RDX, is still the best one. Now granted, they only have like 4 cars today, but that's a different story. And aside from the Integra being dropped in 2001, Acura did revise and revitalize the brand, or at least they tried to anyway, with the RSX back in 2003, which I quite frankly love the RSX. It was a SI for adults, and it was very cool for what it was. And you got the 200 horsepower K20 engine and the K20 at the time. It just was something that you just never seen before, and also the K24. And they did eventually come out with the TSX and the TL and all this other stuff, but the nomenclature behind the Acura change is one of the signifiers of which we should have seen Honda not becoming the forefront, but becoming the follower in their idea of what they think the consumers wanted. And that's kind of where we're going here, but I'll wait until the end of the video to express that. So by like 2003, almost everything is boring. Almost everything. The 7th Gen Civic was the most atrocious thing to come out of the Honda lineup. The 7th Gen Civic was actually intended to be the design wave change that Honda was going, and it just was not critically received well, which is also why in the next gen, in the 8th Gen Civic, which is haloed as one of the most perfect Civics ever built, is one of the reasons why Honda went back and redid it, because people hated the 7th Gen Civic so much. The 7th Gen Accord, people hated. Now, they didn't like the Accord style, but they liked the way it drove, which kind of offset some things. And there was the 8th Gen Accord, but the 8th Gen Accord was more pedestrian than performance. The only thing that I can think of during that time that was really worth looking at outside the Integra Type R in the early 2000s was the S2000, RIP. But the S2000 was crazy, considering it had 240 horsepower, and it was one of the first rear-wheel drive cars that was designed by Honda, and people love that freaking thing. Now granted, be very careful getting into a conversation about which one you actually like. There's the AP1 and the AP2.
Talk about Nisha. You get stung.
Don't answer wrong. And what's crazy is that between Honda and Acura, it was a very interesting dynamic going on, because on one hand, on the Honda side, you had the boring-ass CR-V, the boring-ass Accord, the boring-ass Civic, and then at another point, you had the Acuras, which had the RSX. The 3rd Gen TL, which designed by the great John Ikeda, who I absolutely adore for making that vehicle, because I had one, even though it cost me a lot of money to keep up. But I absolutely adore that car, and many people do. And then you had the RDX Turbo. You also had the ZDX, which was crazy for the time. And at one point or another, it began to feel like Acura was Honda's sugar baby, because essentially Honda was the one footing the bill.
Don't start with that we need another computer shit again. You say that shit every time a new iMac comes out. You ain't slick. You better make that D4 work, bitch, and stop playing with me.
Yes, Daddy.
And I dare not forget the Cross Tour. The Cross Tour, crazily enough, was the future of cars, and nobody saw it and nobody bought it. And as I said earlier, let us not forget about the recalls and quality issues that we've seen come from Honda. Of course, there was the automatic transmissions. The seatbelt tensioners were also an issue. Over 1.3 million were recalled. But more importantly, the Takata airbag situation is really where Honda really had to put a lot of money back into the consumer, into making sure that they recall those cars, because those cars were super deadly and cost at least 8 deaths over the course of the issue, and I believe the number has gone up more. Honda was on the forefront of recalling those vehicles, but it just really cost a lot of money to do. Over 16 million units were affected by that. And quite frankly, this could have been one of the more detrimental things, because now not just the recalls, but also the build quality of these cars weren't seen as reliable. And that is not to say that Hondas are not reliable, and they have not been. But even in the recent days with the oil dilution, people began to question whether or not Honda still has that same level of quality they remember. And brand perception and brand loyalty go hand in hand, and if one is tarnished, typically the other is tarnished as well. And many of the consumers that once had positive experiences with Hondas began to find that they didn't really enjoy Hondas the same way, and that opened up the door for manufacturers such as Kia and Hyundai to come in and swoop in and take up the bulk of what people were deeming with Honda to be reliable and also affordable, because Hondas at one point or another got more and more pricier with less and less things in them. And the 2010s was a very peculiar time for Honda. At one point, the Fit was no longer needed for its services.
Thank you for your services.
The RDX originally came with the turbo, and then they dropped the turbo, sanitized it, and then they brought the turbo back with the third generation. Then you begin to see pretty much the MDX become bigger,
bloated,
bigger,
bloated.
You also see the TL go from clean and seductively styled to bloated and bulbous, and people actually hated the 4th gen. There's a small set of people that enjoy the 4th gen, but the bulk of people who really enjoy the TL will often tell you the 3rd gen is the one that they truly enjoyed. And the 4th gen also dropped the Type S moniker, and then they ended up bringing in the TLX because they wanted to join the TSX and the TL because they were cutting costs, and they also had the TSX wagon, and it was just a lot. And this is just on the Acura side, because this is the last real performance that we get. The Halo car during the 2010s up until 2017 is the 9th gen Civic Si. And don't get me wrong, I had a Civic Si. I've had 3, but that should not have been the Halo car. The S2000 was great. The Integra Type R, great. All performance brands. And where I'm going with this is we slowly begin to see Honda lose its performance identity and become something that we don't really know how to brand. On the Honda side, you begin to see less and less engine options, more hybridization, which isn't a problem, but the performance component behind the hybrid is the problem. There is no reason why Volvo can do a supercharged, turbocharged, hybridized vehicle. Meanwhile, Honda can barely give you 200 horsepower out of a 2-liter Atkinson cycle engine with electric motors and give you 204 horsepower, but there's nothing exciting about it. And I know that I talk about the cues and stylings of the Honda Accord, but many consumers have expressed concerns about the direction that Honda is going in because they don't feel like it's the same Honda they once knew, especially due to federal regulations and EPA standards and all these things. We begin to see more and more Hondas begin to drop things that we once loved about them. And also, not to mention, the CR-V and the MDX are the precipice in the flagships of each respective brand, and those are about as exciting as blueberries and oatmeal. And unfortunately, Honda has gone where the sales are. And sure, we get the Civic Type R, sure we get the NSX, or we had at least before they deleted that too.
What the world is coming to.
But Honda has completely changed from the glory days of the 80s, and I think I have a few observations of why that is. Y'all ever put some food in the microwave and then like it be bubbling and sizzling, but then you actually taste it and it's still cold on the inside? That's how I feel about Honda right now, because I really want them to win.
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you?
So in terms of what I think has happened, I think one of the biggest components that has happened is that Hondas are no longer affordable. From an MSRP standpoint, they're actually cheaper than they used to be. And don't argue with me, do the inflation calculator and you'll see what I'm talking about. But overall, Hondas used to be really, really affordable, and it was not unheard of for somebody to have picked up their brand new Honda. But now Hondas on average are upwards of $30,000. $30,000, and that's for the sedans. The Accord on average is about $28,000 before tax, title, fees. But the newer CRVs, Pilots, Passports, those are fucking $40,000. $40,000 for a fucking Honda. And I know this is no way in respect to Honda. A lot of times this is something completely independent, which I'll get into in a second. But at what point is Honda no longer a affordable value brand and becoming more and more like price gouging? Now, I do want to say this once again, this is not Honda's fault particularly. A big key in what happens with Honda is that they look at sales numbers, they look at what's selling and how much. They don't really care how much they're selling for as much as they are able to produce them in enough time. 2020 was a big deal for Honda because the production numbers got slashed damn near in half and barely recovered in the 2 years before it was officially declared that the pandemic was over. However, in that time, there were so many Hondas that were not made and so many irate consumers, and the numbers look abysmal. And I'm almost certain that affected their stock numbers too, which Honda stock isn't really that high, but I'm not a stock advisor or anything, but I can tell y'all look at the numbers. But anyway, when it comes to price and affordability, the dealers are the gatekeepers. Now, that's a different subject. When it comes to the dealers and Honda, they have skewed and screwed us over so bad to the point where it makes an unpleasant experience when going to the Honda dealership. And this isn't everyone, but the reputation of Honda precedes the cars themselves, and people are still holding on to the laurels that Honda is a reliable quality product, to which it is, but it should not be marked up as high as it is. But when Honda was unable to produce the amount of cars that it needed to produce during the pandemic, that shortened the supply, which increased the price. And now dealers are using that to justify paying $33,000 for a Honda Civic Touring, which originally, when it debuted, it cost $30,000. And mind you, Honda doesn't really do packages like that. They do trims and that's it. So it's become really, really expensive to get a Honda. And also that's considering that many of these Hondas are often used. So most people are going to be financing these Hondas for the next 5 to 6 years, and that makes them less and less affordable. And in addition to the cars not being affordable and the dealer experience being piss poor in many cases, it makes it that much harder for the enthusiasts to embrace the cars. And the other kicker is that when the dealer prevents people from buying certain cars due to markup, that skews the sales numbers. And when the sales numbers are skewed, Honda looks at these numbers and says this car isn't selling. Even though the demand, quote unquote, is there, it is not selling on paper. And ultimately, that's what these companies care about. They don't give a damn about how much you want it. They want to know, did you pay for it? And what ultimately has happened is that more and more of us as enthusiasts begin to feel as though we're left out, which is leading us to go to other brands, such as Ford, such as BMW, such as Kia, such as Audi, such as Mazda, Nissan, so many other different manufacturers, that especially Toyota and their ventures, so many other manufacturers. But the enthusiasts in total that once loved Honda for everything that they had to offer, especially the Acura brand, only the loyalists are left, and that's only a very small subset of people that are willing to stick with the brand. And lastly, the biggest issue is the direction of where Honda is going for a lot of people, and their identity crisis there lies in their direction. there hasn't been truly a concise direction for Honda since the late 1990s. And that could be attributed to a few things, but the biggest one is hybridization and electrification. The problem with that is that these people behind the decisions being made oftentimes focus on sales, and that's to no fail to Honda because that's their job, they're a business. But at what point do you offer us more bang for our buck in terms of not just efficiency, but also performance? Because quiet as it's kept, the same people that made the Ferrari competitor can also make a very, very, very fuel efficient and fun V6. So it is not outside of their wheelhouse to be able to create these things. But Honda is really, really, really big on conserving their finances, as well as they're really big on conserving the supplies that they have. And the dealers are truly the gatekeepers behind whether or not these things sell. And of course, they can't sell them if the production numbers are slashed. So it's all a very volatile and vicious cycle. And unfortunately with that, because there's not as much money, they can't invest that same money into R&D to do more creative and innovative things that they otherwise would not do. And that's not to say that they aren't innovating, but they're just not innovating in the automobile market. And there lies the identity crisis, because now that Honda they will not develop things that we think are interesting because of the sake of sales. They would rather put it in other ventures and leaving the automobile sector to be as bland as a paper bag. And with that said, that's the end of the video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about Honda, and if you think they're having an identity crisis, what you miss about Honda, what you think they should do. I would love to hear your opinions. If you haven't checked out my video already about the Honda Accord, go check it out. Also, if you haven't seen my latest video about Mercedes CLA and the genius decision behind that, go check that out. And until the next video, I will see you guys later.